What if I told you that in some royal courts, a princess's virginity wasn't just a private matter, it was a full-blown spectator sport? Picture this. You're about to get married off to some foreign prince you've never met, and before you can enjoy your royal honeymoon, your body becomes a political theater performance for half the kingdom. Sound horrifying? That's because it was. Throughout history, virginity was basically treated like a political receipt. It wasn't enough for a bride to say she was pure. Oh no. The entire court wanted a front row seat to the proof. And if that feels like a medieval reality show, just remember, at least The Bachelor doesn't end with your sheets being paraded through the streets. So buckle up. By the end of this list, you'll probably want to light a candle for every poor princess who had to endure this ritual humiliation. And hey, if you're into learning about the most messed up corners of history, hit subscribe. That way we can both unpack these dark tales together, probably while both needing therapy. Let's get right into it. Number 1. The public bed ceremony. Imagine this. Your wedding night isn't a private candlelit affair. Nope. Instead, your entire extended family, a few bishops, and the king's drinking buddies all shuffle into your bedroom to watch you get tucked in with your new husband. No pressure, right? This was a common custom in medieval and Renaissance Europe, known as the bedding ceremony. It wasn't always about literally watching the couple do it, though, spoiler alert, sometimes it was. The symbolic act of putting the bride and groom in bed together, often in front of dozens of witnesses, was considered proof that the marriage was consummated. After all, in royal politics, babies were the endgame, and no one wanted to risk doubts about paternity. But here's the kicker. These ceremonies could get disturbingly hands-on. Attendants sometimes undressed the bride down to her shift, escorted her to bed, and then waited around until sounds of consummation confirmed the deed. Imagine your entire future in-laws camped outside your door listening for moans like, "It's the halftime show." Romantic, huh? Basically, royal weddings were less happily ever after and more sex with an audience. Forget roses and chocolates. Your honeymoon gift was state-sanctioned humiliation. Number 2. The stained sheets. Parade. Now, if the audience didn't get the message during the bedding, there was always the grand finale, the sheet check. That's right. After the deed was done, servants proudly carried out the couple's blood-stained sheets and displayed them like a trophy, because nothing screams romance like a crowd applauding your broken hymen. This tradition existed in many parts of Europe, including France, Spain, and Russia. It wasn't just about gossip. It was proof that the bride was untainted and that the marriage was legally valid. Without that evidence, entire dynasties could be questioned. The fate of kingdoms literally hung on a single spot of blood. Of course, biology didn't always cooperate. Not every woman bleeds the first time, and some clever brides resorted to tricks, pricking their fingers, hiding vials of animal blood, or, my personal favorite, training themselves to fake a dramatic scream. It was basically medieval improv theater, with a side of life or death stakes. And just imagine the awkward silence when the sheet came back clean. Accusations of adultery, annulments, or even execution could follow. So yeah, the sheet parade wasn't just gross, it was terrifying. Royal virginity was less about romance, more about performance art with potentially fatal consequences. Number 3. Priests in the bedroom. If you thought the church stayed out of this mess, oh boy. In some cases, priests were directly involved in supervising consummations. Yes, men of God would stand by the bed to ensure everything was going according to plan, because apparently, watching newlyweds fumble under the covers was part of holy duty. The logic was simple. Sex within marriage was sacred, and the church wanted to guarantee it was happening correctly. That meant not just ensuring the act took place, but also making sure it was done in a way that could lead to children. Forget divine privacy. You had divine surveillance. One notorious example comes from medieval France, where clergy were sometimes called in to witness the act for high-profile unions, it was less, God bless this marriage, and more, God's watching, so don't mess it up. The irony? Many of those same priests were secretly breaking vows of celibacy on the side. So while they judged princesses on their wedding nights, they were often having affairs of their own. Classic case of do as I say, not as I do. Basically, it was the original holy reality show, except the confessional booth was in your bedroom. Number 4, the humiliation of Anne of Brittany. Let's talk about Anne of Brittany, a poor woman whose body basically became a French national project. Anne was married off twice to French kings, Charles VIII and later Louis XII, because hey, why stop at one political pawn when you can recycle the bride? During her marriages, Anne was subjected to public virginity checks and courtly gossip about whether she had properly consummated the union. Her sheets were inspected, her fertility was monitored, and rumors flew whenever she miscarried. Imagine your entire kingdom turning into Reddit threads about your bedroom performance. The worst part? These humiliations weren't just about Anne as a woman, they were about Brittany as a region. Her virginity, her ability to give birth, even her supposed passion in bed, all of it was tied to whether her duchy would remain semi-independent or fully absorbed into France. Basically, Anne's body was the map. So the next time you feel awkward about oversharing in a relationship, just remember, at least you don't have diplomats peeking at your sheets like they're analyzing stock market reports. Number 5, Catherine de' Medici's bedtime horror. If Anne had it rough, Catherine de' Medici got the deluxe package of royal bedroom scrutiny. When she married Henry II of France, their failure to produce children quickly turned into a court-wide obsession. Everyone from doctors to priests to court ladies speculated about what was wrong in their bed. Spoiler, it wasn't Catherine. Henry just had a certain, anatomical challenge, but because Catherine was the wife, she was blamed. Rumors spread that she was barren, cursed, or simply too cold. To fix this, physicians and clergy recommended, wait for it, that their consummations be observed. Yes, royal experts considered literally supervising their sex life like it was a state science experiment. Though it's debated how far this went, what's clear is that Catherine's intimate life was treated like a public referendum. When she finally bore children, people still claimed she had used magic, potions, or demonic help. Because apparently if a woman has sex and gets pregnant in the 1500s, it must be witchcraft. So yeah, Catherine didn't just lose her privacy. She became a case study in the absurd lengths courts would go to control and monitor women's bodies. Today we might call it reality TV. Back then, it was just Tuesday at Versailles. Number 6, the Spanish royal proof of purity. Spain took this whole virginity performance to Olympic levels. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Spanish royals turned the bedding ceremony into a literal public event. Imagine a couple being undressed and tucked into bed, not just with courtiers watching, but with ambassadors and foreign dignitaries present, because nothing seals an alliance like secondhand embarrassment. Once the newlyweds were settled, musicians played, toasts were made, and people lingered in the room until the couple got down to business. In some cases, guests stayed so long they practically became part of the foreplay. Subtlety was not the Spanish way. And yes, the sheet parade followed here too. Except in Spain, it wasn't just about proof, it was about prestige. The red-stained linen became a literal badge of honor, paraded like a holy relic. One chronicler even described cheering crowds reacting to the sheet like it was a sports trophy. If you're thinking, this sounds like a frat party but with crowns, you're not far off. Spanish royal weddings were less about love and more about proving your genitals worked under pressure, which, let's be honest, sounds like the world's worst talent show. Number 7, the Austrian bedtime inspection. Austria had its own special brand of awkwardness. In the Habsburg courts, marriages were such serious dynastic tools that consummation wasn't left to chance, or privacy. Eyewitnesses were often required to literally stand by the bed until evidence of intercourse was undeniable. Talk about pressure performance. One infamous case involved Archduchess Margaret of Austria. who was married off to the Spanish heir in the late 15th century. Chronicles mention that her virginity and fertility were inspected as though she were livestock at a market. Courtiers, priests, and even physicians hovered around the bedchamber, eager to certify the royal deed. Imagine your very first time being stamped like a legal document. The irony? Despite all the fuss, Margaret's marriage failed to produce heirs, and she was widowed young. Afterwards, she became a political negotiator herself, orchestrating dynastic unions for others. Basically, she went from being the inspected to the inspector, like the world's most traumatized HR manager for royal weddings. So yeah, Austria perfected the art of killing the mood, centuries before awkward in-laws were invented. Number 8. Marie Antoinette's nightmare. By the 18th century, you'd think Europe would have chilled out about royal sex lives. Spoiler, nope. Enter Marie Antoinette, whose marriage to the future Louis XVI was dissected like a gossip column with life-or-death stakes. Their failure to consummate the marriage quickly became an international scandal. For 7 years, Marie's virginity was the subject of pamphlets, rumors, and diplomatic arguments. Was she frigid? Was Louis impotent? Was Austria, her home country, secretly laughing at France for importing a defective queen? Everyone had an opinion. At one point, foreign ambassadors were literally writing reports back home about the couple's bedroom activities. Imagine being a teenager, married to a socially awkward husband, and having your virginity become the trending hashtag of 18th century Europe. No pressure, Marie. When they finally figured things out, the French court threw a collective sigh of relief, as though the future of the monarchy depended on Marie finally getting laid. Spoiler, it didn't save her head. Basically, Marie Antoinette's virginity was less about her as a person and more like a national sport, with everyone in the stands placing bets on whether the royal couple would score, and people wonder why she had let them eat cake levels of attitude. Number 9. The Russian sheet scandals. In Russia, virginity checks could be just as brutal, and often more theatrical. Tsarist courts had a tradition where the wedding bed, and especially the sheets, were inspected by older female relatives or court matrons. And trust me, they weren't subtle about it. For some tsarinas, like the unfortunate wives of Peter the Great, this was weaponized into public humiliation. Peter himself was obsessed with mocking and controlling women at court, sometimes ridiculing their sexuality in front of others. If the sheets didn't show proof, accusations of infidelity or witchcraft weren't far behind. One particularly grim story involves Tsarevich Alexei's bride in the early 1700s. When the marriage bed sheets didn't meet expectations, the poor woman was interrogated as though she'd committed treason. Because in royal Russia, your hymen wasn't just your business, it was national security. The cruel irony? Many of these royal men were serial adulterers. Their own purity didn't matter one bit, but the women's entire status and survival depended on a single night's bloody evidence. Classic double standard, with vodka on top. Number 10. The Tudor obsession. England's Tudors weren't about to miss out on the virginity circus. When Catherine of Aragon married Prince Arthur, Henry VIII's older brother, their consummation became a question of biblical proportions, literally. Arthur died young, and when Henry VIII decided to marry Catherine himself, the entire marriage hinged on whether or not Catherine and Arthur had ever actually had sex. Catherine swore up and down that the marriage had never been consummated. Conveniently, Henry used this question years later to argue that their union was cursed and should be annulled. Cue endless debates in courtrooms, with lawyers and priests arguing over whether Catherine was technically a virgin when Henry married her. The Pope even had to weigh in. Imagine your teenage wedding night becoming the subject of international lawsuits decades later, complete with theologians debating the logistics of your sex life. Catherine stood firm. She insisted her sheets had stayed spotless, but Henry, desperate for a son, spun the story to get rid of her anyway. So Catherine's virginity wasn't just inspected on her wedding night, it was retroactively inspected for the rest of her life. Honestly, Tudor politics was less Game of Thrones and more Law and Order, bedroom unit. Number 11. The Bavarian bride test. In 15th century Bavaria, Virginity tests went medieval in the worst way. Some noble brides weren't just judged by their sheets. They were subjected to outright physical inspections by midwives or physicians before marriage. Think gynecologist visit, but without consent, and with an entire court waiting outside the door. One recorded case mentions a Bavarian princess whose virginity was declared suspect after such an examination. The fallout? Her marriage prospects crumbled, but political alliances dissolved and her reputation was trashed beyond repair. Imagine being publicly humiliated because some grumpy old midwife didn't like what she saw. This was the danger of the virginity cult. It was a game women couldn't win. If you bled, you were pure. If you didn't, you were ruined. If you had too much experience, you were shamed. If you had none, you were suspicious. Basically, royal women lived in a no-win Hunger Games of purity politics. And the worst part? Men strutted around with mistresses, bastard children, and zero consequences. Meanwhile, women had their bodies literally inspected like crime scenes. Bavaria just made it official policy. Number 12, the humble finger prick trick. Let's end on a darkly funny note because history's cruelty sometimes produced clever hacks. When princesses feared their proof of purity wouldn't appear, some resorted to a secret backup, a well-placed prick of the finger. A single drop of blood on the sheets could mean the difference between a successful alliance and a ruined life. Chroniclers mention women smuggling pins or sharp rings into their wedding chambers, ready to stab themselves mid-act if nature didn't cooperate. Others even used concealed animal blood. Picture a nervous bride fumbling around like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Except instead of applause, she's trying to save her entire dynasty. It was desperate, ingenious, and horrifying all at once, because at the end of the day, these women weren't being tested on love or loyalty, but on whether their bodies bled on command. And if that doesn't sum up the absolute insanity of medieval virginity culture, nothing does. So what's the takeaway from this nightmare tour of royal bedrooms? That power makes people creepy, and that history is basically one long cautionary tale about why you don't turn sex into a spectator sport. These princesses weren't people to their courts. They were props in a dynastic theater, with their virginity serving as the opening act. And honestly, if you think our world today has moved on, just look at how obsessed we still are with policing women's sexuality. The rituals may have changed, but the scrutiny hasn't. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.